Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. It is going to be a great stream. We got a lot of things to talk about. It's been a very eventful weekend. I am exhausted, but I'm glad to be back here streaming with all of you. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Let's do it.
American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, 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 everybody. So glad to be here with all of you. The way we do things here, for those of you who may not be familiar with our format here on these late night streams, the way we do them is that I give my opening remarks, which is just whatever it is I want to talk about, what's on my mind. While I am giving the opening remarks, I am writing down your super chat questions. So if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of our show, question, a comment, something you want me to respond to, whatever it is, send me a super chat and I will write it down during the second half of our show. Then I will answer it. I will do my best to answer it. And that is the way we roll. So opening remarks, then the roll call where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. And then the second half of the show is just me answering super chats. That's how it works. So if you want to send me a super chat about something you want me to answer in the second half of our show, by all means, shoot me a super chat. I'm going to get started with my opening remarks, and we'll go from there. So like I said, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you crush that subscribe button because the YouTube algorithms have a habit of unsubscribing people. If you don't watch my videos for so long or whatever, they unsubscribe people. So make sure you get subscribed. And then after that, make sure you hit the notifications bell so you get notified the next time I want to do one of these streams. You'll get the notification. We're like a community here. There's a lot of people watching who really enjoy it. And so hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and then hit the notifications bell. We're streaming right now on YouTube. We are streaming right now on Facebook. We are streaming right now on Rumble. It'll go up on Rumble afterwards, on Odyssey. And we're also on the Rockfin. So one of these days, I am going to do a Rockfin only stream. I don't know when that'll be, but I'm going to do something that's exclusively on the Rockfin. We're going to do that for a while. I'm going to do that pretty soon. A couple quick things just to throw out there since everyone's keeping up with our community and all the stuff that's going on. If you haven't watched Peter Coffin's amazing documentary that he made about our conference in Washington, D.C., we had an amazing conference in Washington, D.C. back in March, the Summit Against Hypocrisy, opposing Joe Biden's democracy summit that he had. It was very well attended. Scott Ritter was there, the UN weapons inspector. Garland Nixon was there. Dr. Wilmer Leon, the radio host, Sirius XM, he was there. Brana, the leader of the People's Party, he was there. That was great to have Nick Brana of the People's Party, the leader of the People's Party, at the conference. Trying to fix the audio here. This mic. But anyway, Nick Brana of the People's Party was there. That was great. And it was just a great conference. Great music, great speeches all around. There we go. So if you want to go watch that documentary, I recommend you do so. And if you know somebody who you think would like what we have to offer as the Center for Political Innovation, I think that documentary would be a great place to start. That documentary is a great film. It's just an hour long, just under an hour, actually. And it's a great film to just kind of show you what we are all about as an organization, what our community is like. You'll get to meet our president, Elizabeth Young. You'll get to meet Jeddah. You'll get to meet Jyoti Brar, our ally in Britain, important communist and anti-imperialist leader, does important work around the Korean Peninsula. Jyoti Brar, you'll get to meet, Peter Coffin, the comedian. You'll get to meet so many people in our group. So I would recommend, my advice to you is to go and watch the documentary if you haven't watched it. If you have watched it, send it to a friend. That would be my advice. The other thing to mention is we're having a special push to expand the Patreon. So I encourage everyone, we are going to, after the first of the month, probably on the first of the month, we are going to have a patrons only stream. So my advice to you is to sign up and join the Patreon, become a Patreon supporter before we start at the beginning of the month. That way you'll get to be on that patrons only stream, small intimate chat where I just answer people's questions, no opening remarks, no super chats. I just get on there and talk at you all for about an hour. Patrons only streams are small and intimate for diehard supporters of our community. I keep in touch with my patrons. You get free copies of any books that we publish. You get special treatment if you're a patron supporter. So if you become a patron supporter, by all means, go and sign up. We'd love to have you. So that business out of the way, I wanted to update you on everything that's happened. It's been an eventful weekend. So for those of you who didn't realize what's what, maybe you didn't hear, this weekend there was a march at the United Nations, an interfaith peace rally called by different rabbis, different priests, different pastors, different religious congregations to call for UN memorial to commemorate all the victims on both sides in the war between Russia and Ukraine, as well as to call for the peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula, to call for decrease reconciliation between gangs in Haiti. It was quite a rally. It wasn't as big as I thought it would be, but it was a decent sized rally. Official permit, beautiful setup that they had at Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza near the United Nations. So we had our own rally, our own Center for Political Innovation, Rage Against the War Machine rally we had in Union Square, and we marched all the way from Union Square up to the United Nations. And it was great. Irene Marvakakis, the chair of the Delaware Libertarian Party, she came. Daniel Villa, the radio host from WBAI Radio, he came. There were members of our organization from all across the East Coast who came. There were folks from Boston who came down. Brian from Boston came down. Tristan from Maryland. Shout out to you if you're watching. Tristan came up from Maryland. Members from New Jersey. I think Kieran from New Jersey came up, and Briggy from Pennsylvania came up, and I mean, it was great all around. It was a really great day. It was a really, really great day. I'm forgetting some people I know, but it was really, really just a great day that we had. InfraWiki, Jamie InfraWiki was there. Peter was there. Peter, who's a friend of ours from Long Island who does great video work. He was there. My goodness. I mean, I could just keep naming people. Different allies were out there. Jessica, a friend of mine who's, been critical of the vaccine stuff, and she was there. And oh my goodness, it was a lot of people. Space LaRouche, let's not forget Space LaRouche, right? Liam, our good friend Liam from Schiller Institute, Liam Murphy, Space LaRouche, he showed up. He gave a great speech. He was there. Irving, a good friend of mine, was there. I mean, it was a good crowd of people, right? There was representatives. There was a couple people. There was a guy from Vermont from the People's Party. There was a Uribas, a local People's Party activist organizer, came down. That was great. I mean, it was just so many different people from so many different strands of life who were attracted to the Center for Political Innovation and our message. and were wanting to intervene at this interfaith peace rally that happened at the United Nations. And it was a great showing for Rage Against the War Machine. And it was a great showing for the Center for Political Innovation. And I ended up being a speaker at this interfaith peace rally. Even though we were not official sponsors of the rally, we were not on the program. When we showed up, when we marched in with our 25 people, they ended up asking me to get up and say a few words at the rally. So I was on the main stage. I gave remarks to, I spoke at the rally. So that was a win for CPI that we ended up getting included in the program. So there's, there was some great, and thank you for the super chat, writing it down. That'll be the first one that I answer. But there were some great moments, some of which, all of which, I mean, there was cameras rolling the whole time. Our professional camera crews were there, and I wrote it down, and thank you. That'll be the first question I answer. Keep the super chats rolling in, folks. Got to talk about things in the second half, but there were some just beautiful moments. Professional video is coming. You'll get to see the rally near the UN where I spoke. You'll get to see, the rally in Union Square where different people spoke. You'll get to see some of the interactions we had along the way in the march. It'll be great. The high quality professional video that is coming of our intervention at the rally. However, I do have a couple little quick clips, 2 quick clips I can show you that I filmed with my phone. So this is not high quality footage by any means. This is just what I shot with my little phone. 2 moments that I shot. So this is the first one that I'm going to show you. And this video, interestingly, this is just a video I shot with my phone. The Libertarian Party retweeted this today. Now, the Libertarian Party, the official Libertarian Party, the largest third party in the United States in terms of membership, retweeted the video of this today, right? They have over 330,000 followers on Twitter, and they tweeted out this video. So this is the video of when we got to 42nd Street, and we turned on 42nd Street to march toward the United Nations. And this is just kind of our band of people when we marched toward the United Nations. Just a small clip from the rally. So I shot this with my phone.
Peace with China. Peace with Russia. Peace with China. Peace with Russia. Peace with China.
Yeah, just a small clip. You can see Manhattan behind us, the American flag. I should mention we did everything we possibly could to raise the Uhuru case. It was a national day of action to support the Uhuru movement. You saw our big sign. It was our friend Kieran from San Diego. He made this beautiful sign, that says "Hands off Uhuru," and we passed out hundreds of leaflets to random people going by about the Uhuru movement. To do everything we could, we wanted to make sure everyone knew about the Uhuru movement and the suppression of their civil liberties, what's going on there, because that is just a really, really important case that no one knows anything about. Tucker Carlson raised it on his show before he got the boot from Fox News. Glenn Beck has spoken up. I've been doing everything. I mean, there's been a number of civil liberties advocates that have looked at this case and said, look, these people didn't do anything. They didn't do anything. All they did was have some web conferences, and they're trying to charge them as Russian agents. This is dangerous, and this sets a precedent where any political, religious organization could be targeted. So we raised the Uhuru movement. We had hands off Uhuru signs. We distributed hundreds of leaflets, 200 leaflets that we made, and we got the word out there. So that was a really important aspect of what we did. And then this is a beautiful moment I was able to film. This is when we were marching up from Union Square to the United Nations. This was when we got to, we were just passing, we were marching up 3rd Avenue, and there was a FedEx guy, a FedEx delivery guy who saw our rally, and this is what he said. I mean, again, you can't make this up, right? Just a beautiful, beautiful moment that happened, right? I mean, spontaneous, did not see it coming. FedEx driver was getting packages out of the truck. This is what he said.
People. Yeah, yes. Come on, brother. Got his form up, man.
Look at Jerry. There's only so much I can do.
Oh, and y'all got him. Y'all got the bodyguard. No wonder why he ain't say nothing.
Yeah.
Look, Trump 2024, F Joe Biden. He keep giving money to Ukraine. Look, we out here working hard. You see this? Joe Biden is a piece of crap. I could talk without cursing because I know how to use proper English, okay? Just because I'm black don't mean I'm a curse, number one. I love what y'all doing. I respect what y'all doing. Let's go Trump, F Joe Biden.
All right.
And I respect what y'all doing. I respect what y'all doing.
All right.
It was a beautiful moment. Beautiful moment. And this African-American FedEx driver saw us walking by with our anti-war signs and all of that. And he told us he loves what we're doing. And he said he loves Donald Trump. And he said, F Joe Biden. He's sending money to Ukraine. It was a beautiful moment, you know? And it's wild because it goes to show you all these woke people are completely out of touch. You know, these people who say, oh, no person of color would ever like Donald Trump. Well, you know, we're not huge fans of Trump. He did a lot of things when he was president that we didn't particularly like. But Donald Trump is the voice of a lot of anti-establishment sentiments. And those are sentiments we support. And look, he said, look, he's given all this money to Ukraine while Americans are out there working harder. Inflation is making the dollars we earn worth less and less and less, you know? You know, and look, this African-American FedEx driver is like, I am totally with you guys. F Joe Biden. It was a beautiful moment. It was a beautiful moment, right? And it was like, there were moments like that throughout the day. People giving us thumbs up, people giving us support. It was really, really great. So I can't wait until you see the video. You know, it was an interesting day. And, you know, afterwards, a lot of us, you know, we went out to dinner, you know, and I sat with different people and, you know, we have an interesting mix of people that we bring together, right? I mean, it was a wide variety of different kind of voices that we brought together, from Irene of the Libertarian Party, you know, the guy from Vermont from the People's Party, Erebus, you know, People's Party organizer in New York City, you know, people from CPI, different CPI organizers and activists in the city who were out there. Shout out to Io. She was there. Io, a longtime friend of CPI. She was there. You know, Daniel Villa, the radio host from WBAI. We have built a real coalition. That's what a coalition looks like. A coalition isn't a bunch of woke people marching behind the Democratic Party. A coalition is when you get people of wide variety of perspectives who said, we're tired of the tech censorship. We are scared and horrified by what they're doing to the Uhuru movement. We don't want World War III. And we heard that there's going to be a bunch of religious leaders gathering at the United Nations, and they're speaking. So we are going to intervene. And we did. And it was just a really, really great day. And, you know, another beautiful thing about the rally that happened at the UN, there was a Ukrainian Orthodox priest who spoke. And that is so important. Because right now, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is being persecuted right now. The Ukrainian government has accused the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of being a Russian agent, Russian propaganda church or something. They have arrested and raided churches. They've arrested priests. They are being persecuted. And I've done many stories from the United Nations where at the UN, Russian ambassador Nebenzia has highlighted how they are persecuting Ukrainian Orthodox priests in Ukraine. So, you know, it was really great to be, and there was a rabbi who also spoke, and that was great. There were people there, a lot of people talking about peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula, the big banner that we have that said, you know, finish what Trump started, peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. That was a big hit. The crowd absolutely loved it. And, you know, it was a great day, and it was a great day. Our people, I think we really bonded together with each other. And on top of all of that, you know, we then got to see New York City. People saw us in the street. We're going to have high quality video later. It was mission accomplished. A lot of leaflets were handed out. You know, shout out to Timoshenko, who sent me these business cards, these great CPI business cards that we've got, right? He made these CPI business cards. We got a lot of these out to people, right? These beautiful Center for Political Innovation business cards that Timoshenko made. We got those out. We got the Uhuru leaflets out. It was just a really, really great day, a really, really great intervention that we did. But we want to do a lot more interventions like this, right? Because, you know, street outreach, going out and winning people to socialism winning people to anti-imperialism, showing people what we're about. That is so important, right? And that the problem with the internet is great, and I'm happy to talk to you all on the internet. Right now there's well over 100 people watching. It usually rises to about 200 on these streams live, and then there's like a couple thousand who watch afterwards, and that's great. But all of you probably are here because you went looking for this, right? You saw me on RT, you look for communist stuff on the internet. That's how you found this channel. That's not enough, right? As much as I love you all, it's not enough. We have to learn how to get out of the movement and to the masses. We need guys like that driver, right? That FedEx driver. He was with us. We need to recruit people like that to our organization. That FedEx driver was with us 100%. He's like, Biden's giving all that money to Ukraine. Fuck Joe Biden. He wouldn't, I bet you that guy would never go looking for communist stuff on the internet. That guy would never go looking for socialism and Marxism on the internet, but he's with us. That's the kind of person we need to recruit. And in order to do that, we need to figure out a new method of outreach, of doing outreach. And it's more difficult because you don't have foot traffic. Manhattan, you do have a lot of foot traffic because it's the city. You have a lot of people walking around. But in a lot of parts of the country, people are all at home. People are driving. You don't have, buzzing downtown. So you got to figure out how to do outreach. The LaRouche people, they set up at post offices because a lot of people have to go to the post office. Well, that's great. Maybe we ought to, figure out how to have CPI people set up a literature table at a post office, at your local post office. Maybe, get a card table, put a few CPI leaflets, a couple of our books on the table, hand the leaflets out to the people as they go in and out of the post office. Maybe that's what we ought to do. But we need to develop in our organization a culture of, religious people, they call it witnessing. When you do outreach, we need to develop CPI witnessing. That's what we need to do because, the documentary that Peter made is just beautiful. CPI is the best kept secret. There are so many people who are longing for what our community has to offer, longing for a genuine, optimistic, constructive socialism, a socialism that is not about destroying the country, a socialism that's not about woke BS and cancel culture and, the latest new way to be transgender, a socialism that's not hostile to people of faith and religion, a socialism that is about, empowering the working class and aligning the people of the United States and their struggle for economic justice with the people around the world that are struggling to break free of U.S. imperialism. That's what we need to do. And we got to figure out how to get out of the movement to the masses. And these kind of little events that we did, wasn't a huge rally that we did, but it was so important. And that is what we need to do as an organization. We are having a workshop coming up in Missouri. That's the next big CPI event we're doing, June 24th, June 23rd through the 25th, June 23rd, 24th, and 25th. We're having a weekend workshop in Missouri. It's going to be very exciting. I will definitely be there. Our president, Elizabeth Young, will be there. All kinds of people from Missouri and Oklahoma and other places will be there. It'll be just a weekend, of classes, education, group bonding activities about what it means to be in CPI. And that's a step forward. But we got to figure out how we can start getting to people, right? And, we don't endorse any candidate in CPI, right? We are not a political organization. We do not campaign for people. But I think that these campaigns, all of them, all the people that are running against Joe Biden, all of those campaigns are a great place to meet people. And as we get closer to election season, pick one, right? Go to a Trump meetup, go to an RFK meetup, go to a Marianne Williamson meetup, go to a libertarian meetup, go to a Green Party meetup. That's where we need to meet people, right? We need to meet people. The elections are the one time, Lenin talks about this in his book, Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. He talks about how for a lot of working class people, the only time they are ever given permission to think about politics is during the elections. So if you boycott the elections, if you just say, oh, that's not revolutionary, you're missing out. Now, CPI, we're not in a position to run candidates, right? We are an educational organization. We're not a party. However, going to campaign meetups, going to your local RFK meetup, going to your local Marianne Williamson meetup, going to your local Trump meetup, going to a libertarian meetup or a green meetup or a People's Party meetup. That is a great opportunity to meet people who would be open to it. Go. We're going to figure out, we need to figure out outreach aimed at people in these campaigns and how we can have weekend workshops where people who've never heard of CPI, never heard of us, one day they get invited to a CPI workshop. They come to a weekend workshop and they find out what a great group we are. We teach them real Marxism as opposed to this woke garbage. We teach them about overproduction and the capitalist system, why it's grinding people into poverty, why it's holding back human progress. We teach them about anti-imperialism, and that is what we need to do. We need to figure out a way to intervene and win over people. So there we go. We got another super chat. Even if we organize, we still have to deal with the establishment and their agents trying to shut us down. What if they arrest us like Uhuru? So there you go. And I will answer that question for sure in the second half of our show. So those are just a few thoughts I had. A couple other things I wanted to comment on. One thing I wanted to comment on real quick. Roger Waters. What they are doing to Roger Waters is bull honky. It's utter bull honky. And it shows you how much cancel culture is controlled, right? When I was in high school, there was a friend of mine. He said, "Oh, you got to watch The Wall. You got to watch The Wall by Pink Floyd." And so he let me borrow his DVD. Good friend of mine from high school, guy named Dustin. Shout out to you, Dustin, if you're watching. I know you watch these streams sometime. Probably the only person from my high school I still keep in touch with. I think it is. Yeah, the only person from my high school I still talk to is my good friend Dustin from high school. He lent me his DVD of The Wall by Pink Floyd, and I watched it, right? It's a wild film. It's about mental illness. It's about trauma. It's about, it's a beautiful film about kind of, it's about a lot of things, right? It's very Freudian. It's very psychoanalytic. In light of all this talk now about trauma and stuff, that's really what the film is about more than anything. It's about social conformity. It's about, it's about a lot of things. And, it's a quite powerful film. It's particularly dark. It's R-rated. I wouldn't show it to your kids. A lot of violence in the film, but a lot of violence, a lot of sexual imagery. But it's a powerful film that came out during the 1980s, right? And it was based on this rock and roll album that Roger Waters did. Everybody knows that The Wall is anti-fascist, right? The whole premise of the film is that Roger Waters, it's semi-autobiographical. He's talking about his own mental health struggles, his own family history, his own trauma, right? And the film basically starts out with the fact that his father died in World War II. His father died fighting the Nazis, and he grew up without a father. He went to a very harsh, authoritarian British school, and the British school system was very, very authoritarian and abusive back then. And he became a very creative, he was kind of persecuted in school for being a creative person, having a creative mind, not being a very good conformist. Eventually became a rock star, but, in his drive for fame, he was kind of isolated. He didn't have the ability to really connect with other people and destroyed his marriage. It's a beautiful film, right? It's just this beautiful kind of piece about a British rock star named, it's basically Roger Waters telling his life story, right? Pouring his guts out about his mental health issues that led to kind of a breakdown and that he recovered from. And then he wrote a beautiful piece of art that a lot of people can relate to. The horror of war and how awful war is, the problems with authoritarianism and child abuse. And then on top of that, non-conforming people and how people isolate it's just a beautiful film. I that's all I can say about it. It's a beautiful film. It's dark. It's painful. It's not optimistic. It's not something I would ever show at a CPI event. It's not the vibe I want to give people, but it's a beautiful film. And it's very clearly anti-fascist, right? It's very clearly an anti-fascist film. He's mourning his father's death in World War II. He's bemoaning the authoritarian nature of the way his schools were. And part of his mental illness in the film is that he has kind of a like a psychological alter ego, like a dark alter ego, right? There's a dark side of him that fantasizes about fascism, and he rejects that. He doesn't want to be that, right? It's part of his isolation. It's part of the wall that he's built isolating him from other people, right? And that's the whole point, is that fascist alter ego is what ultimately leads to his breakdown, right? That's the whole point, is that his fascism, it's he hates his own fans, right? In his fascist alter ego, he's saying, he's picking out people from the audience. That one looks Jewish, that one's black, and it's supposed to be that this hateful persona that he develops is part of the mental illness that leads to his breakdown. That's the point. So it's clearly not a pro-fascist piece of music, piece of writing. And keep in mind, what year did The Wall come out? The album by Pink Floyd that then they made the movie out of. The Wall, Pink Floyd album. What year? 1982 is when the movie came out. When did the album come out? Right? The album, it came out what year? It came out in 1979. Right? Everything happened in 1979. Right? The Iranian Revolution. The Wall happened. Everything happened in 1979. That is weird. I did not see that coming, but everything happened in 1979. In this book, I have a timeline of events from 78 to 81. Like, everything happened during those years. But it came out in 1979. Roger Waters has been going around performing songs from that album, since 1979. Okay? That's how long he's been doing this, right? Long before I was ever born. I was born in 1987. He's been doing this almost 10 years before I was born. He's been singing these songs and performing these songs. Out of nowhere, a couple months ago, they decided that his music was anti-Semitic and that it was glorifying the Nazis. It is not doing that. The Nazis killed his father. That's the whole premise, and it's against authoritarianism, and it's against militarism, and the fascism is bad. It's portrayed as bad, right? If you listen to the lyrics to the song In the Flesh, it's clearly showing fascism in a very negative light, right? It's so clearly anti-fascist, right? Roger Waters is, his mother was in the Communist Party of Britain, from what I understand, and, his father died in World War II. And, he has a Marxist background. He's an anti-fascist. He is an anti-fascist if there ever was one, Roger Waters. He spoke at the UN. Russia gave him a platform at the UN. And at the UN, he spoke against the arming of the Ukrainian government. And he has taken, he said he condemns Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So he's not 100% supporting Russia. He says he doesn't agree with Russia, but he also condemns the folks. He also condemns the folks who provoked it, and he blamed it primarily on NATO. But Roger Waters is clearly an anti-fascist. But they've started this campaign against him randomly. He's been doing these performances, doing these shows since 1979. He's been doing these shows since 1979, and they just randomly, they took one little clip of him where he's, doing a song that's from the Wall album, where he's in this like fascist alter ego and based on that, they've decided that there you go. He must be an anti-Semite. And they're smearing. They just took the little clip and they just decided to make it go viral. Oh, look, here he is in a fascist costume. He clearly, and then they brought up the fact that he supports the Palestinians, He does support the Palestinians. He's very critical of Israel. He boycotts Israel. He's very opposed to Israel as a Marxist. And so they're trying to say, oh, he supports the Palestinians. Oh, he has this song where he wears kind of a fascist costume as he's singing it. So therefore, Roger Waters hates Jews, and they're trying to ban him from touring Germany. He's been touring Europe doing shows for years. This is bull honky. This is malarkey, right? And it shows how selective this is. It is so selective. They choose to go after people, and it's awful. I support Roger Waters 100%. And you know what? I am going to tweet that right now. I should have just tweeted that immediately, right? I support Roger Waters. Because he's just taking a correct stance, and they are trying to get his tours canceled, and it shows how selective this is. Right? I mean, it's clearly not a pro-fascist, pro-anti-Semitism album. And I just wanted to get that off my chest because I watched The Wall a lot when I was in high school, and I think, it was formative in trying to figure things out, and trying to figure out where I belonged and all of that. As I was politically developing, I was thinking about The Wall. So, honestly, to be honest, I don't, it's not optimistic the way I try to spread optimism. I try not to dwell on negative feelings. I don't like to dwell on kind of dark stuff like that. But I don't think The Wall is bad. I think it's overwhelmingly a good piece of art. Art makes you uncomfortable sometimes. Art delves into controversial topics, right? And the message of The Wall, which is about trauma, which is about authoritarianism. It's about the pain of war and how it affects someone, and how one of the main ways that one can become psychologically unwell is by isolating oneself. That's why it's called The Wall. The idea is he's built a wall between himself and other people, and that isolation is the main feed for mental illness, right? I think that The Wall is a good piece of art, and that the way that they're taking it out of context, and I mean, it's bull honking. And I support Roger Waters. We should all be supporting Roger Waters as loudly as we can right now, because he has taken a good stance on Russia. He's taken a good stance supporting the Palestinians. And now they are selectively using social media to try and ruin his reputation and try and destroy his career as a musician. And it's nasty and hateful and bigoted. And, they shouldn't be doing that. Yeah, that's my position. That is my position. So yeah, I wanted to get that out of my system, tell you that I support Roger Waters. So then the other thing I wanted to do, I want to let you know a couple things. Later this week, earlier I showed you the clip of Sincera Taylor, the communist in Los Angeles, having a fight with the woke people. And Sincera Taylor gave an amazing speech recently about wokeness and her experiences with wokeness as a communist. We are going to watch that later this week. Not tonight, but later this week, we are going to watch that speech because it was amazing. It was amazing. Sincera Taylor probably does not like me. She will probably never come on this stream. She hates Iran. She was just tweeting about how much she hates Iran. I think Iran is a great anti-imperialist country. It has problems like any other society, but Iran is overall an anti-imperialist power that plays a very progressive role in the region. And, whatever, we don't agree, but, Sincera Taylor's speech on wokeness was awesome. It was awesome. I listened to it Friday night, and I was in the bathtub. I turned on Sincera Taylor. I was dying the whole time Sincera Taylor was speaking. I was like, no, she didn't. No, she didn't. I mean, it was so great. So we're going to watch it, and I'm going to react to it on this stream because it was awesome. It was awesome. And I love anybody who talks against wokeness. I'll be honest. I really do love anyone, any leftist, any communist who says woke is broke, woke is bullshit. I like them. And I'll answer that, Johnny. Very important. And any leftist, any communist who comes out against wokeism, I think is awesome, because wokeism, look, there's so many things wrong with wokeism. Number one, communism is not about sex. Communism is about economics. It's about establishing an economic system where the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few. It is about the means of production, the economy being controlled by society to raise up the level of wealth, to end poverty, to unleash human creativity to new heights. It's not about sex, right? I mean, obviously, communists are, against discrimination, against people or whatever, but, and they've historically empowered women, but communism is not about sex, right? Number one. Number two, right? Wokes are into degrowth. They want to drive down the human population. They think there are too many people in the world. They promote, Malthusianism and the idea that there are too many people in the world. We need to reduce consumption to save Mother Earth, that human beings are a cancer, blah, 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 blah. That's not Marxist either. Marxism is about unleashing growth to such high levels that we can have a society of vast abundance where there's enough for everyone to go around and the state can fade away. So that's not Marxism. Third, wokeism is pro-imperialist, right? Wokeism is whatever government the U.S. is attacking, they accuse of being homophobic or transphobic or sexist or racist, and they support the color revolutions to bring down those governments. They want to destabilize countries. They hate Russia more than any other country in the world because of the Trump-Russia malarkey that's been debunked over and over again. So wokeism is pro-imperialist. Need I go on? There's many things I could go on about, but ultimately, the main thing about wokeism is that wokeism it's kind of a fetish for any group you can label marginalized or a minority, right? Now, obviously, communists are against oppression of any kind. They're against division and the stigmatization of any particular group, right? When you oppress one group of people, you can then oppress all of society. Oppression hurts everyone, especially those being oppressed, but it ultimately hurts everyone. But communism is a movement for the immense majority. And Karl Marx makes that abundantly clear, that communism is a movement fighting for the majority. It's a populist movement for the people, for the immense majority. And that every other political movement in history has been a movement of minorities. But communism is a movement of the immense majority. It's majoritarian. In fact, what does Bolshevik literally mean? Majoritarian. That's what it means. So, you cannot. Wokeism as an ideology that is destructive, So with that in mind, and how now the wokes are targeting Roger Waters because they target whoever the imperialists are targeting this week. Because of that, I decided that I would write down, and this is a work in progress. It may end up having more points in it. I decided I would write down the points that kind of define our ideology at CPI. All right, the things that we want to communicate to people. So I decided to write them down, right? And so I decided to write them down, and I've got them here in front of me, and I'll just go over them. There are 14, or is it? Yeah. There are, 15 points. These are my 15 points about what we're trying to communicate people with CPI. And I figured, sometimes you just need a concise, clear explanation of things. So these are the 14 points of what I'm trying to communicate to you on these lives, what CPI is all about. 14 points. We're ready. Point number 1, imperialism is a system. Imperialism is not a policy. Imperialism is not when one country attacks another country. Imperialism is a system. It is capitalism in its monopoly stage. It is the rule of the world by big banks and corporations, ultra monopolies based in the Western countries, holding back development, keeping the world poor so that they can stay rich. That's point number 1. Imperialism is a system. Number 2, imperialism is the main danger. It is this imperialist system, the rule of the world by banks and corporations, ultra monopolies based in the Western countries that are holding back development, that are keeping the world poor. That is the main danger. That is the main contradiction in the world. Are you for the imperialists or are you against the imperialists? That is the main issue. That's point number 2. Number 3, socialism exists in the world today as a result of anti-imperialist revolutions in the 20th century. And that's an important point. The way socialism has come into the world has been through revolutions against imperialism. That is the main way that socialism has come into the world, and that the struggle against imperialism is the defining question. Number 4, in opposition to imperialism today exists an alternative economic system that is centered around socialism. Right? There is a new economy emerging in the world. The Belt and Road Initiative from China, the Eurasian Economic Union led by Russia, the Bolivarian alternative of Latin America, the BRICS, all of this represents a new economy that is emerging around the world today, and that new economy is centered around socialism. You could not have this new economy without socialism, without China, especially, but also Vietnam, Cuba, North Korea, Laos, Venezuela, Nicaragua. You couldn't have this new economy that's emerging without socialism. The new alternative economic system that is emerging around the world that the imperialists are trying to crush, the new alternative to imperialism, is based on socialism. Socialism is what gives it life. Not everyone involved is necessarily socialist. There are many different forces and many different classes involved, but socialism is what gives strength to the emerging economy. That's point number 4. Number 5, a division has emerged between the ultra-globalist monopolies and the lower levels of capital in the Western countries. And this is the basis of the new right. Donald Trump in America, Brexit in Britain, Alternative for Deutschland in Germany, Marine Le Pen in France. These are the lower levels of capital against the ultra monopolies. The lower level capitalists rebelling against the ultra monopolies. That's what it is. There is a divide in the capitalists of the Western countries between the ultra monopolists and the lower level capitalists. The new right represents the lower levels of capital in their struggle against the ultra monopolists. Number 6, the basis of every socialist revolution has always been a class collaborationist united front polarizing all society against the ultra monopolies and the imperialists. You look at any socialist revolution that's ever happened, it's always been the working class aligning with small business owners, peasants, national capitalists, building a class collaborationist united front against the imperialists. That is how revolutions have happened. It's about uniting the communists, the working class, building an alliance against the imperialists. That's point number 6. Point number 7. Communists advocate and would always prefer a peaceful transition to socialism. God damn it. I am so tired of people on the internet talking up, I want violence. I want a violent revolution. That is not Marxist. That is not scientific. And the only reason communist revolutions have happened that are violent is because peaceful means have been cut off. And this point needs to be just hammered home. I am so tired of it. I am so tired of people saying that if you don't advocate violence, if you don't advocate a violent revolution, you are somehow a revisionist. This is what the Chinese Communist Party said. Quote, Marxists have always been willing to bring about a transition to socialism by the peaceful way. As long as the peaceful way is there to adopt, Marxists will never give it up. Right? Here's what they also said. It would be in the best interests of the people if the proletariat could attain power and carry out the transition to socialism by peaceful means. It would be wrong not to make use of such a possibility when it occurs. That's pretty clear, right? And then the Chinese Communist Party also said, the question is not whether the proletariat is willing to carry out a peaceful transformation. It is rather whether the bourgeoisie will accept a peaceful transformation. That is the only way in which followers of Lenin approach the question. It is clear that, yes, the capitalists generally get very, very violent to suppress a socialist revolution, and that forces the working class to defend themselves, etc. But communists do not prefer and they do not advocate violent revolution. At no point do communists advocate violent revolution. They advocate a peaceful transition, right? Point number 8. The aesthetics and appeal toward libidinal release was key in bringing down feudalism, but has been thoroughly co-opted by the imperialists in our time. That, yes, in a feudal society, people's aggression, people's sexual impulses are heavily controlled and constrained. And during the struggle against feudalism, in particular in the French Revolution and elsewhere, the emerging capitalist class realized, hey, we can appeal to people's desire to let it all out. We can appeal to people's desire to unleash their rage and their desire for vengeance. We can appeal to people's desire to unleash their sex drive. We can give people permission to let their rage go, let their sex drive go, and we can use that to take power and seize control. And we can overthrow feudalism and bring capitalism to power. And that's what the French Revolution very much was. Even the red flag, right? I mean, red is the color of passion. It is the color of anger, right? That is very much how feudalism was brought down. And because Marxism emerged kind of out of that period, Marxism is stamped with the, with that aesthetic, with the libidinal drive, the libidinal release. But in our time, Marxists no longer have control of that. Now, if one looks at Facebook, if one looks at Twitter, if one looks at the color revolution apparatus, if one looks at, like, for example, how the mainstream media was portraying events in Ukraine in 2014 or how they were acting during the Arab Spring, it's pretty clear the imperialists have co-opted that. That aesthetic is no longer revolutionary. And in fact, that drive, that destructive impulse, the libidinal release, to tear apart any restraints, that libidinal release, that desire for vengeance, that desire for destruction is serving the imperialists right now. And they're using it to stage uprisings around the world, to destabilize countries. And it no longer has any revolutionary edge to it. It's actually quite dangerous in our time. It's being used primarily for evil, and the imperialists are now using it. Point number 9. CIA manipulation of leftist politics led to a series of events, including the fall of the USSR and the Eastern Bloc, and eventually to the rise of wokism, right? That's starting during the Cold War. You had the Congress for Cultural Freedom program. You had Project MK Ultra. And there was a huge effort by American intelligence, by the CIA and others, to manipulate left-wing politics, to change what it meant to be a leftist. And that led to the New Left in the 1960s. It led to modern art. It led to a lot of things. CIA money and manipulation was all over it. And the ultimate result was you had the fall of the Soviet Union. And now, eventually, you got this thing we can now call wokeness. Wokeness is a result of intentional manipulation of socialist politics by American intelligence. Point number 10. The problem with capitalism is that it puts artificial restraints on human progress and economic growth. It has the problem of overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profit. Capitalism prevents us from seeing a growth in living standards while we see technology advance. And that is the problem. Overproduction, the worker cannot afford to buy back what he produces. Self-driving cars in any rational society would be a great thing, but under capitalism, it would lead to mass unemployment. The problems that Marx lays out with capitalism: poverty amid plenty, poverty created by abundance. The more efficient production becomes, the poorer people get. That problem, people are hungry because there's too much food. People are homeless because there's too many houses. These problems, the problem of poverty created by abundance, poverty amid plenty, that is the problem with capitalism. And the problem with capitalism is that it holds back growth. It prevents humanity from soaring to new heights. Growth is not bad. Capitalism is bad because it puts artificial restraints on human growth and human progress. That is really, really important. In fact, the socialist revolutions that have happened all over the world have happened because countries wanted to grow. China was kept poor by the century of humiliation by the imperialists. They broke free and were able to grow because of socialism, right? Every country that has had a socialist revolution has had the revolution because they wanted to grow. And what is one of the main things that communist governments do? They industrialize, they build, they construct. That's why people are loyal to the Cuban government, because they provide healthcare and education, because they build, they construct. So there you go. Next point. Point 11. The goal of socialism is to increase wealth and prosperity as high as possible, laying the basis for the higher stage of communism. And this is really important as well. You cannot have the higher stage of communism, the ultimate goal of a stateless, classless world, without vast abundance. It is having huge amounts of wealth in society that lays the basis for inequality to fade away. It is vast amounts of material abundance that lays the basis for people to, live on the basis of each according to his own ability, each according to his need, for the state, the oppressive institutions of the state to fade away. The higher stage of communism is based on vast abundance. That is very clear, right? And if you don't have that, if you're not striving to create vast abundance, if you don't understand that, if you moralize it, you're missing the point, right? The point is that capitalism holds back human progress, socialism unleashes human growth, and human growth at vast abundance and productivity leads to the point that you can have the higher stage of communism. Point number 12. Socialism is an economic system, and many non-Marxist Leninist governments or many non-Marxist Leninist forms of socialism have emerged. Socialism is a system of public control and central planning of the means of production in opposition to imperialism. The entire anti-imperialist camp is tied in to a multinational economic system, the bulk of which is socialist. As a result, class lines have blurred. Are Iran and Russia socialist? They are so thoroughly tied in to socialist countries, and their economies are so heavily planned in opposition to imperialism, this becomes unclear and almost irrelevant. Meaning that, okay, is Russia a socialist country? Well, it's not the Soviet Union anymore. And in the 90s, they clearly had a counter-revolution. But at this point, the imperialists have blocked them and barricaded out of their system. And they're really heavily integrated with China. They're really heavily integrated with Vietnam. They're really heavily integrated with all the Bolivarian countries of Latin America, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela. So who cares, right? I mean, it really doesn't matter, right? If socialism is a centrally planned economy, and if Russia is part of an economic bloc of countries, the bulk of which are socialist, and it has a heavily planned economy, how would Russia look different if it was socialist? People say, well, it wouldn't have the same amount of inequality. Well, China's got loads of inequality, and they're socialist. And in fact, Lenin makes the point that inequality and unjust inequality is an aspect of a socialist society. Only in the higher stage of communism, when there's just so much wealth and abundance, do you get rid of inequality. This is not about creating equality. It's about getting rid of the anarchy of production. It's about having a centrally planned economy. How would Russia look different if it was a socialist country? Right? Let's say that some Russian version of the Chinese Communist Party came to power in Russia. What would they do differently? Russia has a heavily planned economy. It has heavily, government-run industries, and it's economically tied in with socialist countries. Same for Iran, right? Iran, right? You say, well, the Ayatollahs, they're, okay, but this isn't about ideology. But how would Iran be different in its economy if it was a socialist country, right? The bulk of the economy is made by the state. They have central planning, right? They have economic plans. The biggest economic entity in the country is the Revolutionary Guards. It's like you could say, okay, well, maybe they wouldn't have the veil, okay, but that's a religious question. That's a political, that's not the economic foundations. How would Iran look different if it was, run by a Marxist, Leninist, or Communist party? It wouldn't look that much different economically. It might look different socially, right? There might be different laws. They wouldn't be drawing as much from the Quran. You wouldn't have, religious, religion in everyday life like you would. Different flag, says Steve. But really, it doesn't matter, right? And that these countries around the world that are anti-imperialist, that are aligned with communist governments, that have their economies heavily tied in with communist governments, that are barricaded and isolated by the imperialists, it doesn't really matter, right? They are so much part of this new emerging economy, of which communism and socialism is such a big part, and they're so isolated and cut out of the Western capitalist economy that the class lines are blurred. The class lines are completely blurred. It's not clear and it doesn't matter. Right? And that's a point that just needs to be made. That's point number 12. 2 more. Or 3 more. Point number 13. Opposition to religion and strict adherence to materialism weakened socialism in the 20th century. This must absolutely be said. The opposition to religion in the Soviet Union, the persecution of Christians in the Soviet Union, the state atheism, the secular ideology, the materialism, all of that hurt socialism in the 20th century, right? It did. These are things that are deeply important to people. In the Middle East, Islam is a really big part of life. In Latin America, the Roman Catholic Church and Christianity is a really big part of life, and anti-religious sentiment doesn't ultimately help socialism. It hurt it, right? And that what we've seen in Latin America, especially in Nicaragua and Venezuela, is that actually religious sentiments can be very useful in building socialism. In Nicaragua, their slogan is socialism, Christianity, and solidarity. So anti-religious sentiment has weakened communism. It hasn't strengthened it, and it was a detriment. And the embracing of religion by socialist states in more recent times is a good thing. 14, point number 14. Sexual politics has no place in anti-imperialism. None. I don't care what your position is on the trans question. I don't care what your position is on gay marriage. I don't care what your position is on abortion. That has no place in this argument, right? You can think whatever you want. You can be against abortion. You can be for abortion. You can be for gay marriage. You can be against gay marriage. You can be for trans people or the trans question. You can be against it. That has no place in our movement. And we should just not talk about it, right? And, the way you live your life, whether you're married or not married, it's not my business. And I don't want to hear about it. And that's it, right? What people do with consenting other people is their business. And it is not the place of a revolutionary organization to get wrapped up and involved in that. In a liberal way of promoting certain lifestyles, promoting certain things, or in a conservative way of telling people, oh, if you're going to be in our group, you got to do this. No, neither one. Neither. It's just sex has no place in our movement. This is not about sex. It's about economics. It's about anti-imperialism. It's about solidarity. It is not about sex, period, right? And if you're looking to build an organization and you start making that an issue from any angle, right? It's a trap because there are many different views on these things. People come from many different cultures and many different traditions. There are many different types of people out there now. And if you're going to build a society, and if you're going to build an organization, just put all that stuff aside. Just put it aside. Don't take a stand, right? If you take a stand pro or con on any of these issues, you immediately isolate yourselves. And that needs to be said. Just don't go there, right? Just don't go there. The trans thing, the sex worker thing, the gay marriage thing, the abortion thing, just don't go there. Just don't go there, right? And that neither pro nor con, liberal, just stay away from it. That's point number 14. Point number 15. The left must be abandoned, and instead a base must be built among the population. The section of U.S. society that calls itself the left, the organized political left as it currently exists, the communist groups, the socialist groups, wokism, is a dead end. Get the hell away from those people. They have no future politically. They are opposed to the broad masses of people. They are agents of imperialism. They have no future. There is no point at all in engaging the left. Out of the movement to the masses. That's point number 15. Out of the movement to the masses. And those are the 15 points that I came up with as kind of central to my beliefs as an anti-imperialist in our time. So take it or leave it. Those are my 15 points. I might turn this into an article. I think this would be something good to put on the CPI website. Those are my 15 points. So I'm curious if people agree with me, if they disagree with me. I respect people's right to say whatever they think. I noticed there were some people that disagreed about the peaceful transition thing. Well, we can argue about that some more. If you want to super chat me something to respond to in the second half of the show, about what you thought about those 15 points, go right ahead. Later in the stream, I will, or not tonight, but later in the week on these streams, we're going to react to Sincera Taylor's amazing talk. Not my perspective, mind you. She disagreed with a lot of what I just said there. But we're going to react to Sincera Taylor's great talk that she gave opposing wokeness from a communist perspective. We're going to do a lot of great things here tonight here. So on these streams, we're always doing great stuff here. I'm excited for the high quality video that's coming out of our great rally that happened this weekend. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. I want to remind you all, if you haven't gotten a copy, this is a great book, and the reviews keep pouring in. Go and read Where is America Going? And go and watch Peter Coffin's amazing documentary that he made. It's linked down below. It's beautiful. If you have watched it already, great. Go give it to a few friends of yours. If you want a real introduction into what our community is about, what the Center for Political Innovation is about, go and watch that documentary. It is just absolutely beautiful. It shows you what our community is really like. It's just beautiful. So on that note, folks, names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. We are now doing the roll call. I will call you out as I see you, and then I will start answering your super chat questions. So if you have something you want me to respond to in the second half of our show, now that we're moving into the second half of our show, please send me a super chat. I will respond to it. I'll do my best to respond to your super chat. Names and locations. So I see Mark in Unica, New York. I see Yanatan Mahari in Stockholm, Sweden. Jonathan in Los Angeles. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Peter Coffin is here. The great Peter Coffin is here. Colin in Greensboro. Stephen Ann in Georgia. Kinky, longtime friend of ours out in Joshua Tree, California, is with us. St. David's, Bermuda is here. Temple City, California. Ryan in Kansas City. David in Rennie, Ontario. Vancouver. Peter is in Florida. Scott in Pennsylvania. Jenny in Cincinnati. Che Guevara is in New Mexico. Nina, you're back. We missed Nina. Where's Nina been? You're back. Nina is here with us. She's in Kansas City. Tristan in Maryland, saw you this weekend. You were awesome, Tristan. Thanks for walking that long hike through Manhattan with us. We got AJ from New Jersey, Joe from Jersey City, Heidi in Edinburgh. We got Phil in Miami. We got Kurt in Hawaii, Joe in South Jersey. We got Chris in Salt Lake City, Briggy in Pennsylvania, and shout out to you. Great seeing you as well this weekend. It was really, really fun to walk through the streets of Manhattan, get to know you better. Anthony, we got Anthony in Detroit. David Fox in Bendigo, Australia. We got James Lizer in Ontario, Canada. We got Mariah in North Carolina. We got Steve in Boston. Alex from Brazil. John Whitty in Houston. We got non-compete live stream. I don't know what that means. Chandler in Georgia, USA. We got Zephyr in Eugene, Oregon. Great stuff. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We are continuing to do our roll call. There's well over 150 people watching right now. It's approaching 200 people watching. It's always really, really great. We got A Better America calling from northern Lower Michigan. It is great. It is really, really great. We're always glad to be here. The roll call is always so great because it reminds us that people watch this, right? This isn't just me blathering into my camera. This is an interactive thing. And this is an interactive program that we do on here. Let me remind you of that, right? If I just wanted to talk at you all, I would record it and upload it, but I don't do that. It's live because I'm looking at the chat. I'm interacting with all of you. That is the thrill here. However, just something worth pointing out. The overwhelming majority of people who watch these, about 90 to 95% of the people who watch these don't watch them live, which is okay, right? Not everyone's free at 10 o'clock Eastern time or whenever I choose to do it, right? But those of you watching live, you are the 1% or the 10%, so to speak. You have the ability to do what James just did, right? Do what James just did and send a super chat and craft the way the show is going, right? I missed a lot of names. I can't do every name. There's Gabby in Chicago, Stephen clearly says I missed a lot of names. I'm just reading them as they come by. But that's the amazing thing, right? So I encourage you to use your privilege as being part of the 10% of people who watch this live and send a super chat so that I can respond. You can craft these lives however you want them to go, right? You have the ability with your super chats to make me talk about one issue, to make me talk about another issue. And sometimes people send me a super chat that just really gets me going. So if there's something you want to talk about, I encourage you to use your privilege. Alex Olivier in Brazil says, we're privileged. You are. Use your privilege as being one of the people who is watching this live to send a super chat and get me talking about what you want to hear about. That's up to you. It is up to you to do that. So I would encourage you to send a super chat, so that I can get talking about whatever it is you want me to talk about. Now, on that note, I'm going to start answering super chat questions. We have got 6 of them so far, and I'm going to answer them one by one. The first question is about Iran-Taliban clashes. I heard about that. On the Iranian border, Iran and the Taliban had a fight, and that's not good. It's not good for Iran, which is a major anti-imperialist country. Not good for Afghanistan, which is a country that has been, under U.S. occupation for many years. And now, the country's been wrecked. And, 20 years they kept it unstable with the drug gangs and all of that. And now the country's wrecked and the Taliban's back in power. And honestly, my hope for both countries is that this de-escalates. Iran is a 100% anti-imperialist country, right? They are the major force of anti-imperialism in the Middle East. The Taliban, I'm not sure about, right? I'll just be honest with you. The Taliban, at the time that the USA pulled out of Afghanistan, the way it was portrayed in American media was like it was this big, it was like Vietnam. Oh my God, it's like the helicopter leaving Saigon. And it wasn't like that. The USA sat down with the Taliban for a year and negotiated with them. And when the USA left, they arranged for a bunch of their military hardware to go to the Taliban. And then you'll notice that, Russia and China immediately had to go in and make big deals with the Taliban. And, I don't know what's going on, but I am not convinced. I am not convinced, let me just say, that the Taliban is fully anti-imperialist. They could be, and I'm not ready to completely throw them under the bus, but the Taliban, let's remember they emerged from a bloc that was fighting the Soviet Union, and the USA met with them for years before basically handing the country over to them, and it wasn't a defeat for the United States. It was very much a handoff. It's like, on this date, we're going to give you the country, and they did, and they arranged for them to get a whole bunch of military hardware. And now it looks like they're fighting with Iran, and I don't know what's going on. I hope that the Taliban realizes that if they want a strong Afghanistan, even if they do it in the name of their, very Wahhabi Islamic philosophy, that Russia and China and Iran should be their friends. And I hope that whatever happened at the border is just a skirmish. This happens every so often. Anti-imperialist forces fight with each other. But I'm not convinced. I am not convinced the Taliban are anti-imperialist. I'll just be honest with you. I got questions there. I got questions, right? The USA was always claiming that Russia was funding the Taliban, but that was debunked many, many times, right? That was overwhelmingly debunked. Russia was not funding the Taliban, right? And Russia debunked that in many, many different points. They said, we are not pro-Taliban. And in fact, Russia at one point was, to some degree or other sympathetic to the USA in their fight against the Taliban. Russia is not funding the Taliban, right? So I look at what happened where Iran is a solidly anti-imperialist country and the Taliban is fighting them. And I'm going, this might not be good. But who's to say there could be sections of the Taliban that are fully anti-imperialist. There could be sections of the Taliban that are collaborators. There's probably a lot of folks in the Taliban who don't care and will just go with whoever gets them the best deal or whatever is going to make them the most money or, there's tribal divisions in Afghanistan. So I'm not ready to comment fully on this, but I will say it looks bad. And that I see Iran as a solid block of anti-imperialism in the Middle East. And I don't have those feelings about the Taliban, right? You mentioned Star Trek IV, my favorite of the series, the other day. I think Star Trek is a mixed bag, but does it envision a post-capitalist society, which is cool? Love your pop culture critiques. Okay. Star Trek 4. We'll talk about that. Post-capitalist society. And I have seen some of those older Star Trek movies with William Shatner, and so I can comment on that. So there we go. Thanks for the super chat. It is much appreciated. Keep them rolling in because that's what gives me something to talk about. Yeah, that's my position on the Iran-Taliban clashes. Is I hope it's just a small skirmish. I'm 100% solid that Iran is a solid anti-imperialist country. Taliban, I'm not so sure about, but we'll just have to see what happened. And you never want to react to events like this too quickly, right? You never want to just jump on top of this kind of thing, right? Because you never know. You could call it too soon. Never forget Cuba. When Fidel Castro came to power in Cuba, they gave him a big parade in the United States. Dwight Eisenhower called him the Thomas Jefferson of Cuba. He came on American television and they called him a hero. He walked around the United States. They gave him a big parade. And they asked him if he was a communist. He said, no, I believe in democracy and freedom. And, I don't believe in communism. I just want to build a better Cuba. But then he started nationalizing things. And then the Soviet Union started offering him all kinds of aid. And then Cuba became a socialist country. Well, for the first year or so after Fidel Castro came to power, a lot of people thought that Fidel Castro was a U.S. puppet. And it turns out that at first the USA was against Castro. They were backing Batista. But then when it became clear Castro was going to win, the CIA actually gave him money. That's factual. They did give him money in the final years because they thought, hey, this guy's going to win the revolution. He might as well be on our side. But then when it became clear that he was going to use his power to improve the lives of the Cuban people, and the Soviet Union was willing to give him aid, that's when, 1961, Cuba really solidly went into the anti-imperialist socialist camp. The Communist Party was formed and took power. And, but let's remember that. But if in 1959, you'd seen the way Fidel Castro took power and you just listened to what he said right afterwards, you would have turned against Fidel, right? And the Workers' World Party, the first issue of their newspaper, they will never put it on the internet, ever, right? Because I've read it and I saw a copy of it and it's quoted. There's places it's quoted. The very first issue of Workers' World newspaper denounces Fidel Castro as a bourgeois nationalist. And the third issue of Workers' World newspaper actually goes as far as attacking the Communist Party USA for supporting Fidel Castro. And it claims that Fidel Castro is an anti-communist. It accuses the Communist Party USA of being sellouts for supporting Fidel Castro. It spreads rumors that Fidel Castro is going to put all the communists in Cuba in prison. And they called it wrong, right? They jumped the gun. The Workers' World Party was formed in 1959. And Fidel was not talking like a communist when he first came into office. And so they announced to the world that they were against Fidel Castro. And they had to eat their words pretty quickly because it was very clear that Fidel Castro was, solidly in the socialist camp in the next year. Within a year, 1961, Fidel was pretty solidly in the socialist camp and aligned with communists. So they made a mistake. And that happens sometimes. And you have to remember, often the dynamics in these revolutionary struggles gets very confused, right? I mean, look, there are groups now in the world today that historically have played a very revolutionary role that are now on the wrong side. Look, I mean, the communists in the Philippines at this point are just the foot soldiers of U.S. imperialism against China. They call themselves Maoists, right? The Communist Party of the Philippines, the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, they are in the Philippines and they primarily target Chinese-owned businesses. They play some of their messages on the broadcasts of Radio Free Asia. At this point, the Maoists of the Philippines, the Jose Maria Sasan crowd, they might have started out as a genuinely revolutionary group. And honestly, if you go back 5-6 years, they were playing a decent role. They helped Duterte come to power and get elected. But if you look at the role that they're playing now, the communists in the Philippines, the rebels or whatever, they're on the wrong side. right? And the reason that they're on the wrong side is because they tried to sign a peace deal under Duterte, and Duterte was not in a situation where basically the USA, that ISIS had done some bombings in the Philippines, and he needed the USA to give him intelligence. So Duterte wouldn't sign a peace deal with them, and so the Maoist rebels in the Philippines got themselves into a situation where they couldn't sign a peace deal, and Duterte, who was more sympathetic to China, was their enemy, and one thing led to another, and now they're on the wrong side, and that's awful, right? And but at the same time, I mean, if we're anti-imperialist, if we recognize that U.S. imperialism is the main danger, that China and Russia and that new economy is the hope for the world, well, we have to look at the Maoist, guerrilla groups, in the Philippines, and just say, guys, you're on the wrong side. You're on the wrong side, But that doesn't mean, who knows what could happen, right? There could become a situation where they're on the right side again, right? So you can't, and the same goes with the Kurds, right? The Kurds, right? The Kurds, in Syria, historically they've been on the right side, but then, they ended up being foot soldiers of the United States, but then the United States ended up pulling up aid. Sometimes these organizations, because of weird dynamics, play different roles, and that doesn't even necessarily only go for communists, right? I mean, I'm talking about, during the Cold War, the United States built up a number of these Bonapartist military regimes in various countries that were a barrier against communism, right? Many countries, they brought to power kind of military strongmen who used the government and the military to build up and develop the economies of the countries as a barrier against communism. And then you'll notice that starting in like the mid 80s, the USA started removing all those people. And the color revolution apparatus of George Soros, that was who they mainly started going after. One of the first ones, they went after was, there was a guy in Panama, Noriega. Noriega was an anti-communist military guy who'd been brought to power in Panama to fight the communists. But then when he was in power, he started nationalizing things, and and he started using the power to aid people and stuff. And so the USA invaded Panama and overthrew him. And there's many examples of this. Park Chung-hee in South Korea was very clearly, the USA hated him. If you look at what they were doing with the Korea Gate hearings and all of that, he wanted South Korea to have their own nuclear weapons. He wanted, he was, developing South Korea in a way that they didn't like him. Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore. Again, this is another military guy that backed up against communism. But it's very clear in the 90s that they were against Singapore. The Bill Clinton administration could not stand Lee Kuan Yew and was working against Lee Kuan Yew. And there's many examples of this, right? And, like Myanmar, Burma, it's historically called Burma when it was a British colony. It's now called Myanmar. That was another U.S.-backed military Bonapartist regime, right? They called it the Burmese Road to Socialism, but it was a U.S.-aligned government against communism. But now, the USA is trying to destabilize and overthrow them. And the military wants stability and economic construction, and China is willing to build the railroads and et cetera. And so because of that, the Burmese military has been moved into kind of an anti-imperialist position. And there's many examples of this, right? It's a big chess game. You have to look at it as a giant chess game, right? And that one piece moves here and another piece moves here, and that all these different forces, right? A lot of times they end up being chess pieces, and they get moved here and they get moved there. And sometimes they get pushed on in one direction where the role that they used to play is not the role they end up playing, right? I'm going to take Russell Means, for example. Russell Means was the leader of the Native American movement, the American Indian movement in the United States, AIM. Very progressive person, met with the Black Panthers, was a big in protesting the Vietnam War, and he led American Indians. They occupied the Bureau of Indian Affairs to demand the rights of Native Americans in Washington, D.C. He was involved in a lot of progressive things. But over the course of the 1970s, there was a divide in the American Indian movement, and the new left counterculture was on one side, and the more Marxist kind of elements were on another side. There was a woman, I think her name was Anna Mae Aquash, and she was found dead. It was, she was the leader of the movement. There was, the movement was divided. People thought people had killed her, and there was suspicion. And long story short, Russell Means ended up becoming a pro-imperialist activist, right? He went to Nicaragua and made propaganda films for the CIA against the Sandinistas in support of the Contras of Nicaragua. And he, even though he came from a revolutionary anti-imperialist, he was basically the Black Panther leader of the Native Americans. He was the Black Panthers for Native Americans. He ended up, in the final years of his life in the 90s and stuff, he became a pro-imperialist propagandist. Whenever, the CIA wanted to overthrow some country, he would go there and claim some indigenous group was being oppressed, and he would do propaganda for the imperialists. And then they arranged for him to be in like every Hollywood movie ever. If you look him up, he's like the Native American guy in like every Hollywood movie they've ever made. That's Russell Means. You can't say he didn't play a good role, but again, in the dynamic of the divisions, one thing led to another, and he was on one side. And that's how these things happen, and we have to remember that. Different roles, groups, and the Taliban could be a similar thing. The Taliban, who knows, right? The Taliban could get into a situation where they're forced to play a progressive revolutionary role. But they could also get into a situation where even though they have this anti-Western Islamist ideology, they're used to target Iran or Russia or China. You don't know, right? So again, you have to not see this in terms of good guys versus bad guys morality. You have to understand the dynamics that play out. But anyway, that's a long answer to one question. Now I'll get to the next super chat question. Even if we organize, we still have to deal with the establishment and their agents trying to shut us down. What if they arrest us like Uhuru? Well, that's a very fair concern, right? That's why the Uhuru case is so goddamn important. That's why I'm doing everything I can to raise from the heavens, hands off Uhuru. And, they have leaflets on their website you can print out everywhere. There should be hands off Uhuru leaflets everywhere. We need to do everything we can to support the Uhuru movement right now because it is so vitally important. Okay? That's really, really important. Now, that said, what can we do? Well, one thing we need to do, and this is what I'm adamant about, we have to find friends in the power structure. People get mad at me for promoting Tulsi Gabbard. Well, you'll notice Tulsi Gabbard hosted for Tucker Carlson. And Tulsi Gabbard, has spoken up about suppression of civil liberties. And Tulsi Gabbard has made statements that are much more sympathetic to Russia and China. And Tulsi Gabbard is speaking up about their weaponization of the judiciary. And if you're just isolated, you're just on your own, you can get attacked. If you're going to do the kind of work that we do and build a real organization that puts out a controversial, revolutionary, anti-imperialist message, you need allies. We need to be looking for allies in the ruling class. We need to be building an anti-monopoly coalition. And I wrote an entire book about this, right? Right? We need to have people within the power structure who see us as allies, who see us as useful to some degree or other. That's one thing that people on the internet, right? First of all, if you just are on the internet, right? If you're just on the internet, they're never going to do anything to you because all you're doing on the internet is your old man yelling at cloud. No one cares, right? You can get on the internet and tweet, I hate American imperialism. Russia is awesome. No one cares. But if you start building a real organization, yeah, you are subject to a new level of threat, right? You start building a real organization, organizing in the streets, building a community of solidarity, teaching people anti-imperialist politics, getting together and having meetups. Yeah, you can bet. You can absolutely bet that at that point you could potentially have problems, which is why if you do that, you need to be finding allies on the inside. And people have it in their mind that like anyone who has any allies who are not genuine full-on communists, anyone who has any such allies, right, is an agent. And it's like, no, right? Anyone who ever got anything done has real friends. Tulsi Gabbard is awesome. We need to promote Tulsi Gabbard like crazy, right? We need to absolutely promote Tulsi Gabbard like crazy, even though she has problems, right? Look, we need to find a way to relate to the people that are supporting RFK. There's obviously problems with RFK, as Peter is pointing out, and other people have pointed out. And I understand he's about to put out a new book on China that's horrendous. That doesn't mean we should blindly follow these people, but we need to find a way to relate to these people, right? If we just sit around and we isolate ourselves, yeah, we are a target, right? Again, we're not in this because we want to destroy America. We're not in this because we want to foment chaos. we're in this because we want a better country, and we understand that that means building an anti-imperialist united front, an anti-monopoly coalition. And that means that we need to have friends on the inside. And my orientation was always that the Democrats were slightly better. That's how I always thought. And when AOC first got elected, I knew AOC before she was AOC. Did you know that? I actually met AOC. I am photographed with AOC before she was AOC. Met her at a meetup. I'm photographed with her. And I talked to her, and I tried to like AOC. I went to her town halls and was sympathetic with her, but those, especially when she attacked Jimmy Dore during the whole force the vote thing, it became clear. I mean, the left doesn't want our support. If you're anti-imperialist, the left thinks you're a Nazi. They advocate violence against you. They want you to be murdered and killed. Right? If you don't support war against Russia, right? If you believe in genuine anti-imperialism, they think you're a Nazi. They think the left wants to murder us, right? If you're against the low-wage police state, if you're against New World War, the left wants to kill you. If you don't immediately sign on to every one of their transgender or whatever, they want to kill you, right? Whereas there are other people. So my instinct used to be that we could make friends on the left in the Democratic Party. You cannot make friends on the left. So got to make friends elsewhere, but you got to make friends. If you're just isolated, well, you're not achieving anything, first of all. You're just sitting on the sidelines. You're just an old man yelling at count. But if you're isolated and you're actually building an organization, then you're a sitting duck and you can be targeted, right? And you could still be targeted, right? And we oppose all repression, and we should all be prepared for that. We should have legal trainings in our organization about what to do. We should obviously, take precautions. But at the end of the day, if they want to get you, they can get you, right? They have to decide it's worth their time. But they can get anybody if they want. And that's the awful thing about all of this, right? It's not about the law, right? You look at what the Biden administration is doing to the Uhuru movement right now. You look at what they've done to some of these Trump people. It has nothing to do with the law. If they want to get somebody, they get them. And and that's how awful it is. And we need to be exposing this because, that's the anger. When Tulsi Gabbard talks about the weaponization of the judiciary, that's what the Biden administration is doing. They're using the government to target their opponents. And what Tulsi Gabbard pointed out in a recent video is, it's an escalation. So the Republicans are going to do that when they come into power. The Republicans are going to target their opponents, right? Because that's how this works, right? If you're in a fight with somebody and they bring a knife, then you're going to have to bring a knife. If they bring a gun, then you're going to have to bring a gun. Right. And so the Biden administration, this escalation where they're jailing the Uhuru movement, they're jailing a bunch of Trump supporters. What do you think is going to happen if Trump gets back into office? Trump's going to think, okay, well, now I got to jail my opponents. It's not a good thing. It's not a good escalation. This is the kind of thing that leads to civil war. We don't want civil war. We want a new America based on socialist principles. We want the country to come together and be more prosperous and trade with Russia and China and have a strong economy and a new America for working families. We don't want a civil war. So that's why we should be opposed to this legal escalation. And if Trump were jailing his political opponents, I would be against that also. All right. So there you go. All right. Roger Waters was threatened by a national security operative in his own home country. Reminds me of what happened to Malcolm X and MLK. Well, Roger Waters is a rock star, okay? Malcolm X and MLK were civil rights. They were leaders of an oppressed community in the United States. They were organizers of the Black community. Roger Waters is having his reputation run through the mud, et cetera. But, let's not exaggerate here. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were both shot and killed. They were both spied on relentlessly by the government. You can't compare the two things. I am 100%. I support Roger Waters. I am on his side. He's being unfairly smeared. And that shows how they can turn this woke stuff on and off. The cancel culture is very selective. They just randomly now decided that In the Flesh, the song he's been singing since 1979, is anti-Semitic. We know what this is about. And this is about him speaking at the UN, supporting Russia. That's what this is really about. And we know that it's about the fact that he takes a good stance on Palestine and other things. But at the same time, what he's been through, he's a successful rock star who has heroically taken anti-imperialist stances and now is being targeted for it. That's not the same as Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. Not the same thing at all. right? Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., those are people that are, that were leaders of the oppressed community, that organized their own people, did heroic things, took great risks, and ultimately lost their lives for doing so. Completely different situation. You can't compare it. You can't compare it. All right, next question. Why do Americans think that communists hate capitalism? Well, that's a provocative question, right? Because in a way, we do. I mean, capitalism, as defined by the system of production organized for profit, the anarchy of production, the system where people are homeless because there are too many houses, where people are hungry because there is too much food, the system where you have chaos, where, the better, the more effective production is organized, the poorer people get. The coal miner's riddle that I always quote on here. The little boy says to his father, "Why is it so cold?" The father says, "Because I can't afford any coal to heat the stove." And the little boy says, "Why can't we afford any coal to heat the stove?" And the father says, "Because I lost my job at the coal mine." And the boy says, "Why did you lose your job at the coal mine?" He says, "Because there's too much coal." That's capitalism. Capitalism is a system where corporations have an incentive to lock people up in private prisons, where there's an incentive for war because of military contractors, where private big pharma corporations see an incentive to push dangerous addictive medications. We have an opioid epidemic in the United States. Capitalism, a system that, in order to maintain the dominance of Western corporations, sends people all over the world, to make profits. I know, Mariah. I know you weren't saying that, but I was just I don't know. I was just reacting to that. I didn't want anyone to take me out of context. No, I get what you're saying, right? That people getting threatened by the government, for what they say. I get you, Mariah. You're good. Don't worry, Mariah. Come on now. Come on now. Yeah, I get you. I get you. Right? That capitalism was an advance over feudalism. Feudalism was an advance over slavery. Slavery was an advance over hunter-gatherer civilization. But capitalism has become outmoded, as Peter Coffin is putting it, right? And it's holding back human progress. And so we need to move to a higher stage to unleash productivity, right? We need to get to a higher stage of society. And that means empowering the masses, the broad masses of people, to mobilize in their own interest and eventually take control of the means of production, right? That's Marxism, right? Marxism is not about jealousy and envy. Marxism is not just, some people have more than me, I'm mad about it. That's not Marxism. Right? Marxism is a science. It is understanding the objective laws of history, the nature of the capitalist economy, the tendency of the falling rate of profit, the problem of overproduction, the general law of capitalist accumulation. There are certain concepts that explain why capitalism is a check. It's holding back human progress, and it's leading to a more and more unstable society, poverty amid plenty, and that we need to move towards socialism. That's what Marxism is. All right. Next question. But I can give more of an answer, Gabby, before we go on to that. So it's not that we hate capitalism, I guess. It's not just like we just have this capitalism is so it's that we recognize that it's a check on human progress. And that, that there could be capitalists that are in alliance with socialism. I think that's what you're getting at, Gabby, right? I think that's what you're getting at, right? That there are various, that you're talking about like a market sector in a socialist society. That's not capitalism. I wouldn't put it that way, but a market sector in a socialist society, right? Using a market sector, to have, consumer goods in a socialist society. That's what all the socialist countries have realized, right? That, socialist central planning and state ownership works very good for heavy industries, works very good for the banking system, et cetera. But, the strength of Nicaragua is their micro entrepreneurship program. Vietnam, they have a lot of small businesses that are subsidized by the state. So I think that's what you're getting at, Gabby. You're talking about the need for a market sector to strengthen socialism, but that's not capitalism in my view. As long as the means of production still function according to a central plan, even if some of them are private, even if you have a market sector, I would view that as still a socialist society. Capitalism is a system where profits are in command of production. Socialism is when you have a central plan and the economy is controlled for a society overall. So I get what you're getting at. It's not exactly how I would put it, but we understand each other. So there we go. Next question. Scott Ritter was in Irkutsk saying that they are not longing for the USSR to come back, but rather for Tsarist Imperial Russia. What are your thoughts on that? Well, I have a couple thoughts on that. One of my thoughts is you have to remember that, Scott Ritter is a conservative. He's a Ronald Reagan Republican, and I think they know that, right? And that, when they're meeting with this American who is anti-imperialist and taking good anti-imperialist positions, and they know that he's a strong anti-communist, they're probably not going to emphasize Soviet nostalgia to that guy. You know what I mean? That's one thing, right? And that the other thing is that Tsarist nostalgia, number one, and Soviet nostalgia kind of walk hands in hand. It's the Donetsk People's Republic. It's the Lugansk People's Republic, right? So these are communist names. But if you look at the flags that they've chosen, they all have the Tsarist eagle on them, that's the eagle of the Tsar, right? And that, especially if you study Alexander Dugin, and he's a very important thinker in Russia who I am not ashamed to have met with, right? I am very proud to have met with him. I'm very proud to have met with his daughter on many occasions before she was brutally murdered. It was horrific what was done to his daughter. It was a crime. And the way the left on Twitter celebrated it, because I didn't know who she was, but she's bad. I mean, unbelievable. Ben Norton can go to hell the way he celebrated Dari Dugan's death. That's a sick, evil person, Ben Norton, pretending to be an anti-imperialist. He celebrated her murder. He should be ashamed of himself. Dari Dugan was a great woman, one of the nicest people, one of the smartest people. She's much younger than I am, but so well-read. She knew Marxism. She knew anarchism. I had a long chat with her about George Sorel one time. I mean, she knew politics better than anybody. She could speak English. She could speak Russian, obviously her native language. She could speak French. She'd studied in Paris as a student. She knew philosophy. Her views may not have been mine, but the way she was murdered, brutally murdered by the Ukrainian fascists, just a brutal assassination. And it was just awful. But anyway, you read Alexander Dugin, you read a lot of the Russian geopolitical analysts, when they talk about Russian empire, right? And it's very similar in China, right? They're talking to the geopolitical reality, which is that part of the world, Eurasia, where you have big land masses, right? You don't have, just direct access to the ocean. You have big land masses. Right? People have been living in Eurasia together for thousands and thousands of years. The United States, it was about 400 years ago that white people showed up and started, colonizing and being settlers here in the United States. And before that, it was just the Native Americans that were here. But these people in Eurasia, they, in Central Asia, in China, in Russia, in the former Soviet Union, in Iran, in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, countries like that. Those folks have been living next to each other for thousands and thousands, for like 5,000 years. They've been living next to each other. Okay. There's a lot of history there, right? History in the United States, obviously, it's pretty offensive that we don't keep track of the Native American history, but the continent, the political history of the United States starts like 400 years ago. The political history of Eurasia starts 5,000 years ago. Okay. The history of China, the history of Russia, the history of Persia, Iran, you're talking thousands of years here. Okay. And if you look over the history of those thousands of years people have been living together, things have been better in those parts of the world when people have been unified. When different regions have been unified, right? When the land surrounding the Soviet Union was unified, things were getting better. Roads got built, education increased, technological advancement went up. You had an advance. And when things were bad, people were all fighting each other, right? The history of China, what they call the century of humiliation in China. They describe it. Deng Xiaoping says China was like a heap of loose sand. Tibet was being run by the Dalai Lama. Hong Kong was a British protectorate. The central government, the emperor, didn't even have control over a lot of areas because of the warlords. There were these warlords that didn't recognize him, right? And China, during the time that it was kept poor, was heavily divided. And the reason the Communist Party is loved and the reason the Qing dynasty is loved in China is because they brought one China together. And the reason the Soviet Union is admired even by many conservatives in Russia who are very anti-communist is because they recognize that just like Ivan the Terrible brought together all of those regions and built them up, times were better when they were together. Right. And so a lot of what they call about they talk about Russian nationalism. Right. And Lenin wrote a very famous essay about this, about how even the communists believe in great Russian patriotism. I'll pull this essay up. It's a very good essay that Lenin wrote about great Russian national pride. Right. That a lot of people in Russia and the surrounding countries, not just Russia, but the surrounding countries of that part of the world, understand when looking at the history of that region that life was better when they were together. And some of those people are communists who say life was better when it was the Soviet Union. And some of those people are very conservative. And I hope this is answering your question, Johnny. Some of those people are very conservative, but they just say, look, historically in Ukraine, things were good when Ukraine and Russia and Moldova and Latvia and Lithuania, when we were all together and we were raising our people up, life was better. And that is just, if you are just a pure nationalist, you recognize that. But if you're not a communist, right, if you see things more from a geopolitical perspective or an orthodox conservative perspective, but that's very big in Russia now. Orthodox conservatism is a very big trend in Russia. If you see things from an orthodox conservative lens or from a Russian nationalist lens, you're going to say, well, the Soviet Union was better than what we have now, but the Soviet Union was just one incarnation of the great Russian, Ivan the Terrible. And, and that there is something to be said for that. And that's how Alexander Dugin sees it in his writings. He talks about Eurasianism, right? And so it makes sense that a lot of the people in the, in the new republics of the Donbass region, that they might say, well, we're not longing for the Soviet Union. We're longing for, Catherine the Great. We're longing for Ivan the Terrible because that fits, right? It fits the kind of geopolitical narrative. There's a lot of Russians that are deeply conservative. There's a lot of Russians who even consider Lenin and Bolshevism to be anti-Christian and reject it on that basis. But then they see in Stalin like a czar kind of figure because he built up the Soviet Union. He defeated the Nazi invaders. Russian politics is not like American politics at all. Okay. In America, we have the left that are supposed to be kind of socialist, but they're not, and are all about, wokism. We have the right, which are all about free markets, but also are, more Christian and religious. It's not like that in Russia at all. It's all different, right? The head of the Russian Communist Party is an Orthodox Christian. The gay rights movement in Russia is very much anti-communist. The peace movement in Russia is very anti-communist. It's the rich kids that protest with Navalny. You have something called the Liberal Democratic Party in Russia that is like the more authoritarian right-wing party, the more traditionalist conservative party. You have the Communist Party, which is communist, but that's a party that's very much a nostalgia-oriented party. It's led by a Russian Orthodox. It's complicated. It's all complicated, right? Russian politics and American politics are not the same. They're not, right? They're just not. So, I mean, you can't project it here. But the idea that there might be people in the eastern regions who say, oh, we don't want the Soviet Union back. We actually want, what? We actually want, the great Russian civilization, the Tsar. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. Just like there are people in China who say, well, we love the Chinese Communist Party, but it's actually because Confucius was the first communist, right? That's a common belief in China now, that Confucius was the first communist. And there are things that Confucius said about the last day. I think he referred to, like, he said, my greatest regret is that I will not live on the last day. And then he listed the last day was an ideal society where there was no unemployment, where there was no hunger, there was no war, and so some Chinese communists say, well, actually Confucius was the first communist, and and that the Communist Party is just the current expression of our great Chinese civilization that goes back 5,000 years. That makes sense that they would say that, right? You have to understand this, that the way we see things in the left, we have this in the West, we have this very narrow view. There's the right and the left, and that is very Eurocentric, right? No one was talking about left and right in politics until the French Revolution. After the French Revolution, the people that were loyal to the king sat on the right, and the people who were more radical, the Jacobins, they sat on the left, and then that became a thing. And even that is hard to keep up with. I mean, I believe in historical progress. So in theory, that would make me like the Jacobins. That would make me on the left. But the left hates me, right? Because I don't believe in chaos, because I don't believe in libidinal release, because I don't believe in destruction, because I believe in economic socialism and not just chaos and violence and death, because I'm patriotic. So it doesn't make any sense, right? And that left and right are very, 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 very confusing. Right. Let me just put it that way. It's very hard to know what they even mean. And if you get out of Europe, it gets even more nonsensical. Right. I mean, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, I like them. I think they're awesome. But their leader is an Orthodox Christian. They're definitely against gay marriage. Right. They're definitely against homosexuality. They're not woke, in any conceivable way. And they were the biggest supporters of Russia's intervention in Ukraine. They were calling for it to happen ahead of time. And they're very nationalistic, right? They're very proud of, a lot of the rhetoric that they use, would be, labeled right wing in the United States, but I think they're awesome in a lot of ways. They're a great party. So there you go. All right. Next question. Any books on Soviet infrastructure like the Crimean Peninsula? Well, let me see what I've got on my shelf. But one book I would recommend is called Cities Without Crisis. Cities Without Crisis. That is a book that came out. It's by Mike Davidow. That was a book that came out in the 1980s or 1976. Cities Without Crisis, and that was just like a description of what the Soviet Union was like. It was published by the Communist Party. Mike Davidow, the journalist, he went to the Soviet Union and he wrote this book called Cities Without Crisis, describing the Soviet Union. But if you want to talk about the Soviet Union, you want to talk about it, there's a number of books I would recommend. There's a book called, it was written by a Cambridge University lecturer, an academic who had qualifications to write it, Soviet Economy since 1917. That's pretty good. I always recommend Soviet Communism, A New Civilization by Sidney and Beatrice Webb. It's a two-volume description of what the Soviet Union was like. Soviet Communism, A New Civilization. I have both volumes of it, right? Sidney and Beatrice Webb were two members of the British Parliament who were not communists. They were in the Labour Party. They were from like a kind of an aristocratic, wealthy British family, and they wrote these two books, Soviet Communism, A New Civilization, right? Another book that I recommend if you want to learn about the Soviet legal system, this book, Human Rights in the Soviet Union by Albert Szymanski, is very good. It describes what, the USSR was like in terms of human rights and economic, the fascinating history. And Albert Szymanski wrote a couple books about the economics of imperialism that are very good. Another book I would recommend, Soviet but Not Russian. This is about the national minorities in the Soviet Union, what their treatment was like. Very, very good book. Right. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, there's a number of good books on the Soviet Union and their economic projects that you can read. One book that is like it's about agricultural science. I waved it around on a stream the other night. It's the memoir of an American agricultural scientist from a very wealthy background. Yeah, this guy. I enjoyed reading this book. This is about Lement Harris. He was a very wealthy man in the United States who studied agricultural science. And when the Soviet Union was building up its farm system, he went over there and he was so blown away by the system that he saw. He came back and joined the Communist Party USA. My Tale of Two Worlds. This is a very good book by an American academic describing what life was like in the Soviet Union, how just being this wealthy, kind of normal, conservative, wealthy guy, he was just so blown away by what he saw in the Soviet Union, he became a communist. This is a great story I would recommend. Edgar Snow, he wrote a number of great books about China, but he wrote this book, The Pattern of Soviet Power, where he's describing the economic system of the USSR. I love Edgar Snow's writing. Red Star Over China was his best-selling book. He was the first writer to ever interview Mao Zedong in China. He's mainly known for his China writings. This is a Soviet book he wrote, Pattern of Soviet Power. I would recommend this. Soviet economy during the Second World War. This is pretty good. Talks about the war economy during the Second World War. So yeah, there are many good books on the topic of the Soviet economy. I often recommend the book Socialism Betrayed by Roger Kieran. That's a book by a leader of the Communist Party USA about why the Soviet Union fell. There's another very good book that was published called Heroic Struggle, Bitter Defeat. It's about the history of the Soviet Union. I would recommend that book as well. So there you go. I hope that answers your questions there. All righty. Does CPI provide a PDF or a paid leaflet? The main thing is on our website, if you go to cpiusa.org, on the very first thing you see that comes up, and we're trying to fix the website now because, we're a little behind, the news section hasn't been updated, and we're trying to fix the website. There's some technical issues we're trying to deal with, but the first thing that comes up, if you just go to cpiusa.org, is our 4-point plan. Cut and paste our 4-point plan onto a leaflet, right? That 4-point plan is something that most Americans, the overwhelming majority of Americans, would agree with, but all of the points in our 4-point plan go against the power of the big monopolies, the entrenched interests that run the United States. So if you really want to do outreach to people about our 4-point plan, I would recommend you print out copies of our 4-point plan and just do outreach about that. But also, we now have these palm cards, or these business cards that we've made for our members. It was Timoshenko who took this on. Shout out to you. I would recommend you join the Center for Political Innovation. You join our organization, join the CPI. You can do that by going to the website and joining, and then get on one of our Zoom calls and raise this issue so that, we can ship you business cards to get out. We can ship you books. We can help you, right? We can help you organize. That's what we do with our members. And every Saturday we have a Zoom call, and the Zoom call begins with report backs, people reporting on what they're doing around the country. Then from there, we go over the current business of the organization. And then from there, we have an open floor where people ask questions. They talk about different things. Every week we have a Zoom meeting. We have one every single week. So if you're a member, you will get invited. You'll get an email invite to our Zoom call. We usually have sometimes 20 people come. But there's usually just 14, 15 people there every Saturday. Every Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific, we have our weekly meeting, and people talk about whatever's on their mind. So if you want to do outreach for CPI, I would like you to do outreach for CPI, and I would like to help you do that. So join the CPI. That's the first step. And then we'll plug you in. We'll connect you with people. And maybe you want to come to our workshop June 23rd to 25th in Missouri, near St. Louis. So there you go. All right. The next question we got is about Star Trek 4. So Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home. That's the Whales movie. Right. Yeah, that is a great film, by the way. That's they go to Earth back in the 80s, and they're trying to talk to whales. And Star Trek was very much, it was Cold War liberalism. If you look at those films, and especially the one that they made, there was one they made, The Undiscovered Country, that was very clearly a comment on Gorbachev and the fall of the Soviet Union. And you watch those 80s Star Trek movies, they're very much, it was about the fall of the Soviet Union. The Klingons were the Soviet Union. The Federation was the United States. And it's like some people are afraid of change. Some people are afraid of peace, you know. And, you know, that's what it was about. And Voyage Home, it's about whales. It's about environmentalism and the whales. And you need to protect the whales. And like they're suspicious of the Russian speaking guy and the nuclear vessel and all of that. And you watch it, it's nostalgic, but it's very much, it's, you know, in the 80s, the left were against nuclear power. The left were, you know, they were becoming more and more environmental. And you watch the Star Trek movies from those periods, and they kind of reflect that, right? I will say there's one of the Star Trek movies, I forget which one, where the bad guy is like an evil psychologist. I thought that was amusing. And he says, "Give me your pain." And he like brainwashes people by making them like feel, he says, "Give me your pain." Right. And that people tell him they're like painful memories or whatever. And that's how he gets power over them. And then what is it, like Captain Kirk, his line is, the guy says, "Give me your pain." He says, "No, I need my pain. My pain is what makes me who I am." It's not. And I just thought that was amusing. It was amusing, but it was, you know, the villain is supposed to be some evil brainwashing psychologist who says, "Give me your pain." And then Captain Kirk says, "No, I need my pain. My pain is what makes me who I am." And it's like, pain makes you stronger. Emotional trauma makes you stronger is the message. And that Captain Kirk embraces his pain. And that's how he's able to defeat the bad guy. I remember that one. That was certainly amusing. Was that Wrath of Khan, or I was one of those Star Trek movies I remember. So yeah, you know, yeah, you know, the Star Trek movies were amusing, right? You know, yeah, they were amusing. You know, I watched when I was a kid, I would occasionally watch the Next Generation show with Picard, the bald guy, and then I would watch the Voyager show when I was a kid, but I'm not like a super into that kind of stuff, right? I think Deep Space Nine, which was the show that was also on when I was a kid, I didn't watch it that much. I would watch it occasionally, but they had a subplot that was very clearly some kind of comment on the Israel-Palestine thing. It was like there was some two groups of people. One had been occupying the other, and they'd been fighting each other for thousands of years. And one was kind of an indigenous group, and one was a group of settlers. And that was clearly some kind of comment on, you know, you know, Israel-Palestine. And then there's the Ferengis or whatever, that people say was anti-Semitic. It was like some alien race that's, you know, fits a lot of Jewish stereotypes. And there's a lot. Star Trek is a complicated thing. And honestly, I don't know that much of it. It's been years since I've watched anything related to Star Trek, right? When I was like a teenager, it was just something to do. I had a television, you know, that's about, I mean, it was just something to do, but I didn't, you know, and I think, you know, my dad had been a huge fan of Star Trek. I think we had a Star Trek encyclopedia that someone had given to my dad as a gag gift or something. And I used to read the Star Trek encyclopedia, you know, my parents had on the shelf. I would read, you know, about the history of the Klingons and stuff, you know, but it was just whatever, you know. See, somebody in the chat knows it. I mean, I guess they know it. I mean, as far as you know, I mean, I don't know. I probably watched a lot of that when I was a kid, but honestly, I don't know. I don't know how good it was. There was one episode of Star Trek Voyager that I thought was amusing. Are we really talking about Star Trek on here? Does this make me like a nerd? I mean, it's like I'm not even that much of a Trek person, but it's like someone asked me to comment on Star Trek. So I am. And then it's like, here I am. I guess this makes me a nerd, but that's okay, right? I mean, the whole thing, this whole bookshelf behind me makes me a nerd, right? I remember there was one episode of Star Trek Voyager that really stuck with me. And it's, you know, it's like two of the characters have been arrested on this other planet, and they're sent to a jail with no guards. They're sent to a jail where the people are all just locked there, and there's no guards. But all the people have a chip in their brain that prevents them from working together so they could get out. I thought that was really clever. That was a really great analogy, right? So it's like they're sent to this jail, but there's no guards in the jail. The people just get dumped in this jail, and there's like food that's like deposited there, but there's no guards in the jail, right? And they all have these like chips, you know, embedded in their brains that make them hopeless, that make them fight with the other people. I thought that was brilliant. That was some kind of comment about class solidarity and oppression, and oh, that was some Marxist. Somebody was having some Marxist fun there. with that episode, and it was quite a powerful episode. I don't remember. It was Star Trek Voyager. It was one of the episodes, the prison with no guards, where everyone has just a chip in their brain that makes them fight with everybody else, that breaks their solidarity so they can't be free. That was clever. That was a brilliant analogy, brilliant political statement. Science fiction is generally good. A lot of people will argue, and again, you can't generalize, okay? There are exceptions to this from both sides. But largely, science fiction is progressive because it's looking to the future. Fantasy is reactionary because it is glorifying the past and feudalism, right? And, the Nazi government promoted fantasy. Did you know this? This is true. The Nazi government, the myth that they promoted, they taught all the kids about Sleeping Beauty, right? That, that the German people were the beautiful woman put to sleep, and the Jews were the witch that cast the spell, but Hitler was the knight in shining armor who kisses the girl and wakes her up, right? And the Nazis really promoted Wagner. They promoted Wagner, and like the Nazis, they had in one of the Wagner operas, the hero gets stabbed in the back, and so they used that as an analogy for they said Germany didn't really lose the war. They were stabbed in the back by the Marxists who were anti-war and sabotaged the war effort. The Nazis were all about, swords and knights and castles and Wagner and fantasy. But it was the Soviet Union that really promoted science fiction, and outer space movies were a big thing in the Soviet Union. There's a lot of Soviet movies about outer space, about people going to other planets, etc. That was a really big part of Soviet movies, which is interesting. The Soviets were looking to the future. The fascists were looking backwards. Feudalist, fantasy stories often have a theme of, it's weird because it doesn't even fit feudalism, right? I mean, it's just a weird thing. But one of the most common themes you get in fantasy novels is someone is a king or a queen. They're the rightful heir of the throne. They're a princess or a prince, but yet they end up being a common person. They're thrown to be among the common people, and they have to get their oh, thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. They have to get their title back. They have to reclaim the throne that's been stolen from them. And it's weird because it's some kind of rags to riches thing, but it's also like some kind of weird Ayn Rand. Like, I know I'm a genius, but society does not recognize my greatness. It's a weird, like, capitalist fantasy projected onto feudalism, right? It's the king who is deprived of his throne and spends the novel proving that he's the king. The princess who has to live with the common people but spends the novel proving that she's the princess so she gets her crown back. It's a really big common theme in fantasy novels. It's like an Ayn Rand, unrecognized great man fantasy. But, feudalism, you're born into it anyway. It's not your greatness. You could be stupid and be the queen. It's just you're born into it. Doesn't matter. Right. So even that's even weirder, right? It's even weirder in that sense. But that said, there are progressive fantasy novels and there are reactionary science fiction novels. Robert Heinlein, the sci-fi novelist, was completely reactionary. He was a British Empire, Malthusian, imperialist, white supremacist, colonialist, free marketeer. He was awful in so many ways. And he was so awful that I believe Starship Troopers, the movie that they made of his book Starship Troopers, is like mocking him, right? He wrote it completely seriously, right? I remember I read Starship Troopers. Every chapter, it's like basically there's this outer space army that's like conquering new galaxies. And it does all this like really authoritarian traditional stuff. They have the death penalty. They have floggings and, all kinds of stuff. And it's like supposed to be why this outer space army is so amazing, because they have, and they slaughter, I don't know, they kill foreign, they slaughter the other species and they're supremacist. And it's all about how basically like the British Navy during the Victorian era was like the ideal because it was so authoritarian. And that's what we need to bring back, and it's awful. And that some of Robert Heinlein's writing is really blatantly racist. He apparently wrote some sci-fi novels where like the black people take over the world and they're like really, really offensive. Like he has one where it's like I think it's a novel that he wrote. Someone was telling me about where it's like the USSR and the United States have nuked each other, and so like Africa is like becomes the leader of the world, and it's really racist. He says, it's really really racist. I forget what the name of it is. Robert Heinlein is just, I mean, he is a sci-fi guy. He's writing futuristic sci-fi shit, but it's really fascist. I mean, it's really right-wing, really authoritarian, really racist, really free market, might makes right. Some people are just better than others, blah, 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 blah. So he's an exception to that rule, right? Robert Heinlein is a sci-fi writer who's very, very authoritarian. There you go, right? Star Trek tends to be left-wing. Star Wars, a lot of people say, I've heard people argue it's not actually science fiction. It's fantasy in space. And I actually, in a lot of ways, I would say Star Wars, if you really think about it, it's almost a cowboy movie in outer space. But there are new left themes in it. There's nothing Marxist about Star Wars, right? And if you actually know what Marxism is, the class struggle, there's none of that in there. There's new left themes in Star Wars. The heroes practice this mystical ancient religion where they wear robes and they're giving up their hate and they're learning to love. And that's a hippie thing, right? In the first one, Luke Skywalker lives with, he's a teenager who lives with his aunt and uncle, and they don't understand him. And he runs away from home to join the rebels, to join the revolution. That's a hippie thing. He's got a shag haircut. The bad guys in Star Trek are the Empire, and they dress in black, and they're all military. That's a new left thing, hating militarism, hating the military. So Star Wars is really, it's very much a new left hippie movie. I don't see any Marxism there. I just don't. I don't see any Marxism in Star Wars. I see new left hippie counterculture, Eastern mysticism, teenage rebellion, anti-militarism. At some points you could say it's glorifying the primitive, like the Ewoks, or like people who live in, these bears who live in tree houses that are fighting the scary technology from space or whatever. I can see all of that, and there's a lot of, it's a Vietnam era thing. Absolutely. But I don't see a lot of Vietnam era stuff has Marxist themes in it. I don't see that in Star Wars. I don't see Marxism in Star Wars at all. I see hippies. I see counterculture. One of the weird things, I don't know if you know this, but Project MK Ultra, which was the CIA's program to research, mind control, one of the programs that they had was called Operation Jedi, I believe, where they were researching like, what was it? It's like they were researching like psychics, and they were paying all kinds of people to be psychics and stuff. It was called Operation Jedi. They named it after Star Wars, which I think is wacky, So there you go. I mean, there's many weird things like that. George Lucas did make many pro-Soviet statements, but I don't see that in his films. One of the pro-Soviet statements that he made, he said that filmmakers in the USSR actually have more freedom than American filmmakers because the government doesn't censor your movies in the United States, but the producers do. Right, the people paying for the movie do. They sit there, this is more marketable, you can't do this, and that they will rewrite your whole script based on what will make the money. Whereas in the USSR, you have to follow the party line. You can't be doing anti-communist stuff. But other than that, if you're the director, you can make whatever goddamn movie you want. Well, George Lucas said that was more freedom. He also said, and yes, you said it before I did, Phil, that the rebels in Star Wars were based on the Vietnamese, right? Now, I just don't see it. There's nothing in the Star Wars movies that sounds Marxist to me. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something I am missing. But everything I see in the Star Wars movies is new left, it's hippie, it's anti-establishment, anti-military. I don't see anything explicitly Marxist. I just don't. I don't see anything explicitly Marxist. So maybe I'm wrong. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but there you go. AMLO has refused to sanction Russia and is using the military to fix Mexico. USA is now calling him authoritarian. Yep, and I like AMLO. And AMLO is becoming more and more of a Bonapartist, and that's good. He leads a Popular Front coalition government, and he's moving in a left Bonapartist way. He didn't recognize the election results at first, when it was contested, and he said he's had elections rigged against him many times. And so when Trump said it was rigged against him, he questioned the election results, didn't congratulate Biden. There's some Yeah, there is definitely some stuff. AMLO, I see he comes out of the teachers' movements, the strikes in Oaxaca. I like AMLO. I think AMLO, he comes from a good place. He's an anti-imperialist. He represents, working class movements. Unfortunately, he's not a full socialist, but then he's leading a united front, and the socialists don't have the upper hand. And he's, the deep state of Mexico is largely controlled by the United States. I mean, the USA supplies the Mexican police with all kinds of weapons that then end up in the hands of the drug cartels. And, it's very difficult, the position he's in. But the Communist Party in Mexico, which is called the Labor Party, which used to be one of the Enver Hoxha parties, and then it just kind of became a regular mainline Communist Party. The PT, the Labor Party, is part of the coalition. Right? AMLO has a Communist Party that has seats and is part of his Morena coalition that is ruling Mexico. So I have a very positive opinion of AMLO, but AMLO got along much better with Trump than he does with Biden. Okay? And that's what I'm trying to tell you all, right? Woke is not left. Woke is not communist. Woke is a big fat joke. And AMLO liked Trump more than he liked Biden. And I'm just telling you, folks. I'm just telling you. So on that note, folks, it's been fun. We'll be back probably tomorrow night, if not tomorrow night, later in the week. We're going to talk about some Sarah Taylor and her anti-woke speech. We're going to talk about all kinds of things. There'll be video from the protests that happened this weekend soon. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to post, some other great things. So there's a lot of things I still need to post. So I'm going to call it a night, but we'll be back. I'm going to put on the closing music, and there we go. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.